Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff, and this is Sophia to my left. You can't see her, but we are going to be reading 365 Days through A Course in Miracles. I'm just hypnotizing you
What
with
are you
this
doing?
snake effect here to get started. Going to give you all the entertainment. Now we got a few bars of Dear Mama played for you. You are
You
appreciated,
are
whoever you are.
appreciated,
All right.
dear Mama Earth.
So, just trying to keep you entertained here while you're getting spiritually
You're
enlightened with
so
A Course in Miracles.
entertaining.
We're reading day 104 of 365 Days Through A Course in Miracles, a version the Holy Spirit inspired me to put together to compile all of Jesus' original, complete, unedited material that he gave to Helen in a 365 daily devotional format. Okay, so I'll start here. This is Bill entitled this. He was given the job of entitling the sections, and he called it "The Defense of Conflict." If you want to follow along in your blue book, it is The Unbelievable Belief, text chapter 7, section 8.
So exciting too. So we're gonna reread it again because the
Yes.
other one gets
Yes. This is
discounted.
a new
All
one.
right, this is new material to me. Not
Yes.
entirely,
So
but in this form,
you are
it
not
makes
alone,
sense.
whoever you are, if you've never heard these earlier versions, but they're
So
exciting.
that's
They're
why,
fun.
yeah. Okay, we once said that without projection there can be no anger. But it is also true that without projection, there can be no love. Projection is a fundamental law of the mind, and therefore one which always operates. It is the law by which you create and were created. It is the law which unifies the kingdom and keeps it safely in the mind of God. To the ego, the law is perceived as a way of getting rid of something it does not want. To the Holy Spirit, it is the fundamental law of sharing, by which you give what you value in order to keep it alive in your own mind.
In your own, yeah. So there's a lot here in this section. So I'm going to reread it and then we're going to talk about it for a second. We once said that without projection, there can be no anger, but it is also true that without projection, there can be no love. Projection is a fundamental law of the mind, and therefore one which always operates. It is the law by which you create and were
So the
created.
mind is always creating, always
Yes,
extending, always projecting, we can say. Right?
always projecting.
Projecting.
And I guess I was just going to read it all the way through and then talk about it. We can
Well,
do
I
it this
read
way.
it all the way
Yeah,
through
I
once
know,
already.
but we can reread it. That helps it to absorb in both the listener's mind and in our own. So, but what I was going to say, since we're talking about it, is that basically the ego is this idea of hatred that crept into the mind of God's Son. Before it was just love. Love and was loving thoughts was all he shared, and those were the thoughts he shared with God because God is love.
So it was just
And so the
a
Holy
little idea of something that might oppose God.
Yeah, it's this
Could
idea of
something
hatred,
oppose
this
God?
idea of anger or hatred, and it's all directed at the self. We hate the self we made. We hate the ego. The ego is really hating itself
The
because we are not
seed.
capable of hate. But the ego is a thing of hate, and it only knows how to hate. And therefore, it hates you, really, is what it hates. It hates the real you because it knows that at any moment you could withdraw allegiance and it would be gone. So it fears and hates you. And this self hatred is intolerable to the real you, being love, being made in the image of God, which is love. And so, this hate is intolerable to you. So the ego tells you, okay, well, I get it. You can't stand this hatred.
So
Project it
projected
out
out
onto the
as.
world, onto your brothers. See them as hateful
So
things.
that's what the ego wants to
Then you
get
will
rid of.
escape.
It sees it as something it wants to get rid of.
it
It
that
does not want.
it sees that you want to get rid of it because you can't abide by it, you can't tolerate
Not
it when
me,
you're
not
in your
love.
loving
Love
nature.
doesn't.
Yeah, love
Right.
can't abide by it, it can't stand it, it can't stand by it. I mean, it can't tolerate
I
it. And
understand.
so the ego advises you, project it out. And since we've turned to the ego for instruction or for safety or for guidance,
Then
we
that's
then
fear.
allow ourselves to project. We choose to project, thinking that we've somehow escaped from this hatred. But really, that's how we keep it because that's the law. The law is that what you project, you keep.
Yes.
So, but
So when we
so
project
yes,
our true selves, which is only love, then
right.
that's what we get to
That's what
keep.
we can always
There's
safely
nothing to be
project.
afraid of. There's the ego would lie to us and tell us all kinds of things that are not true, but we don't have to believe it any longer.
Exactly. So this projection is the law, whether it's misprojection of the ego, which is projecting anger, hatred, fear, and all these things, which cannot actually be shared, but it can be projected. This projection is the law by which you create and were created by God. It is the law which unifies the kingdom, makes it one, and keeps it safely in the mind of God. To the ego, so the kingdom is another word for the sonship, or the sum of all the souls that God created. To the ego, the law of projection, is perceived as a way of getting rid of something it does not want. To the Holy Spirit, projection is the fundamental law of sharing, by which you give what you value in order to keep it alive in your own minds. So it'll always be there. Love will always be there in your own mind. Holy Spirit, all the qualities, the fruits of the Spirit will always be there in your mind, but to keep it alive, that means to keep it in your awareness of it. Alive was taken out, but I like that word in there. It's your turn. Second paragraph.
Projection to the Holy Spirit is the law of extension, radiating. To the ego, it is the law of deprivation. It therefore produces abundance or scarcity, depending on how you choose to apply it.
Or misapply it.
Yes, this choice is up to you, but it is not up to you whether or not you will utilize projection. You will project, but you can decide whether you will project abundance or scarcity.
Anger or love.
Yes. Joy or conflict.
Yes. Peace or conflict.
All right.
Joy or sorrow.
Every mind must project because that is how it lives, and every mind is life. The ego's use of projection must be fully understood before the inevitable association between projection and anger can be finally unmade.
So first he's trying to make this association between projection and projection and anger as the ego uses it.
So that we can see it.
So once we see it though, then the goal becomes to unmake this association.
Nobody even sees it though.
To undo.
So
first we need to understand.
And
that's why he goes such in depth in talking about the dynamics of the ego, which doesn't even exist at all.
This is the only way to reach the lost, is keep repeating things, the truth, different ways.
Just because something is lost doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it's misplaced, he reminds us,
That's why we have bodies, so we can talk about this.
Exactly. We're using bodies in the right way as communication devices. So projection to the Holy Spirit is the law of extension, aka the law of sharing. To the ego, it is the law of deprivation, or taking away from. It therefore produces abundance or scarcity. If you try to deprive your brother of the kingdom, you will perceive yourself as without the kingdom by the law of projection.
Right.
Because what you give is what you keep.
Because
our brother is our mirror.
Join me in the kingdom. Come on, let's go together. I don't remember the entire combination without you. We all have a whole piece of the combination to get in.
It's like, that's a good way to look at it. We're both a key in the combination. And we got to work together, cooperate as miracle workers. Yeah. That's a nice idea. It therefore produces projection. Therefore produces abundance or scarcity, depending on how you choose to apply it, or who you choose to turn to, whether the ego or the Holy Spirit.
Right.
This choice.
You make no decision alone.
Right. This choice to project or misproject is up to you, but it is not up to you whether or not you will utilize projection. 24/7, 365, we're always projecting in our waking and our sleeping thoughts. Every mind must project because that is how it lives. The mind never sleeps, he says in another place. And every mind is life. So the mind is life. Life is not of the body, it's of the mind. The ego's use of projection must be fully understood before the inevitable association between projection and anger can be finally unmade. Your turn to read.
Oh, where am I? Right. All right. The ego always tries to preserve conflict. It is very ingenious in devising ways which seem to diminish conflict only because it does not want you to find it so intolerable that you will insist on giving it up.
Giving what up?
We're talking about conflict. No, we're talking about conflict. The ego always tries to preserve conflict. Yeah. He's very ingenious at devising ways which seem to diminish the conflict
So he's talking about I'm giving it
Only
up.
because it does not want you to find the conflict so intolerable that you will insist on giving it up.
So
It's
yeah,
just
it here is speaking of conflict, but since conflict is the ego, since the ego is
so
the idea of
it
conflict,
doesn't
that's
want
why
you to
it
give
doesn't
it
want you.
up. Okay.
Because to give up conflict would be to give up itself, and that's as impossible as lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps.
It does seem quite impossible at this, even from any to give it up entirely.
Yeah,
So
the
we
ego
couldn't
cannot
be
give up
here even
itself. That's the
speaking.
thing. Because the ego is the
And I
idea
know
of
the
clinging
ego
to it.
though, but it seems like I need this ego to sit here and talk to you.
Well, remember, that's
you
not
know?
the ego Jesus is speaking to, is the ego that allows you to speak or cross the street without getting hit by
Well,
a
there's
car.
only one
He's
ego, isn't there?
Well, there is a multitude of, there is as many egos as there are people or beings in the universe
Are there that many Holy
that are conscious.
Spirits? No.
No,
There's only one
well,
right
remember
mind,
there is zero
one
egos.
wrong mind.
Remember, in
I
truth,
think the wrong
remember,
mind
let's go
is
back to the
inclusive.
basics. Let's
It's
go back to the
not
basics.
separate
Let's go back to the
parts.
basics. There is a total of zero egos in the universe that God created. There
Right.
is no such thing as
There's
an
no
ego.
ego.
There's not one, there's not a billion. There is zero. As this is what Jesus would say. Now, the number is irrelevant. If you want to argue about that, you're getting into what he'd
We're
call
not
theology.
arguing about
I'm
anything.
not
We're
saying
merely
us, but I'm saying,
discussing,
yes, we're just discussing it. So we can look at Jesus and see he had attained a great degree of egolessness, even though those around him were full of it. So
and they projected it onto him.
and they
quite
misprojected,
often.
yes, their ego onto him, yes, or their conflict, their inner conflict onto him.
It's such a good demonstration.
It is a good demonstration.
We're always getting just what we're putting out there. Nothing else. Not anything more or not anything less
Right.
than what I asked for. So all my prayers are answered. My prayer, if I'm thinking, I'm praying. If I'm not guarding my mind and it's wandering all over the place, I'm praying for conflicted
Yeah,
desires.
praying and
So
projecting are synonymous. We're always praying or we're always projecting is saying the same thing.
But when we train our minds to be in line with the Holy Spirit, then we're actually
then we can pray for meaningful things rather than meaningless things.
Yeah, we're extending. That's where the
And
joy comes from.
Exactly.
Begin to extend as our Father does.
The atonement cannot be understood except as a pure act of sharing or projecting, as the Holy Spirit knows projection.
Yes.
But the ego, look at what it does. The ego always tries to preserve conflict. It wants to keep conflict. It wants to engender conflict.
And then it's got these
and it is very ingenious in devising ways which seem to diminish the conflict. Actually, it's not diminishing it. It's increasing
pushing it underground.
It's pushing it underground where it builds and builds and blusters until it finally explodes.
That's where the value of the no private thoughts. We allow our thoughts to just come out without worrying that we're offending.
Yes.
Because we've agreed we won't take offense. That's what it means to be a mighty companion and to hold space for healing for each other.
But even while we're trying to express our emotions, our feelings, our ego stuff, we're also keeping the other in mind and wanting to come.
There is no other.
Well, there is. God created all the souls, and so we want to come from a place of kindness and compassion and love always.
Of course, but we don't know how that's going to look. We can't judge what form it will take. If I'm trying to choose the form of my compassion, that's not compassion.
What matters is that's our intention. That's our guiding light.
Intention, yes.
Yeah, and if we say there is no other, then we won't care how we treat them. But if we know that there is another,
myself that way, and so sometimes I'm confronting myself, and it seems like I'm being mean to myself. But I'm just trying to make myself see. Hey, come on, look, let's see another way.
But look at what Jesus is trying to do.
If you're not happy, obviously you're missing something here.
Where is Jesus trying to guide us here in this course? He's trying to guide us in this section to making an association between projection and anger, and then help us to unmake that association, so we can associate projection with what? With love, with all the good things that the Holy Spirit would project, right?
Yes.
That's what he's trying to do, is make that association.
Healing and acceptance of the atonement, which will just be the end of ego altogether.
Yes, and of course, even though it's accepting it for yourself, it's also sharing it with everyone else. You have to understand both sides are equally true and equally valid statements, because as it says, atonement cannot be understood.
Everything.
We are in duality, so every truth has its equal and opposite truth.
All the illusions are equally untrue, so they are equal.
Your only responsibility is to accept the atonement for yourself as a miracle worker, and atonement cannot be understood except as a pure act of sharing. These seem contradictory, but they are not really. They need understanding to unite these seeming differences and that they entail. So here we go. Therefore, the ego tries to persuade you that it can free you of conflict, lest you give it up, that's speaking of the ego now, and free yourself. The ego, using its own warped version of the laws of God, uses the power of the mind only to defeat the mind's real purpose. What is the mind's real purpose? To accept the life that it is, to accept the atonement, to become one, to become one-minded, to move
Well,
beyond having a split
why are you
mind to
reading?
having a unified mind.
I thought I was going to read first.
Well, you did
You
already
leave
read.
me out. I've never, I mean,
No, just put your phone
no, you're
down and
just,
we can.
you're distracting by other things.
I'm not. I'm doing a commentary here. You're not being a good student.
I know, because I'm messing up
Look,
your
you're supposed to be
recording,
that.
but
You're
this is
supposed to
how
be
the
the student.
recording is supposed to go. I'm supposed to be the student.
You're supposed to be the example
You're so
student for everybody else listening.
okay. I'm the example
And
student.
when you read, you can also be the teacher, but
No,
you have to
I'm
be.
not. I'm
We have to
nothing.
play our
I'm
roles.
nothing.
We have to
I'm
play
not
our
even
roles when
here.
it's time to play our
I
roles.
said I'm not here.
All right, here we go. It. Can you put your phone down?
Yes. I'm putting it down right now. Bye bye, lovely phone with all my beautiful people.
It, the ego, projects conflict from your mind to other minds in an attempt to persuade you that you have gotten rid of it. Gotten rid of what? Conflict. This has a number of fallacies which may not be so apparent. All right, your turn. You can read.
It has to be high for me. Okay, where are we? Strictly speaking?
Mhm.
Strictly speaking, conflict cannot be projected precisely because it cannot be fully shared.
What can be fully shared? Communication, atonement, like that.
Okay, any attempt to keep part of it and get rid of another part does not really mean anything. Remember, that's the same thing. It always reminds me, if you're trying to keep one brother for one purpose that you wouldn't have another, it's like you're not, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, our purpose should always be to join and share an atonement with every brother.
Yes.
If that's our purpose, then it doesn't matter what behaviors the bodies do together, because we can't possibly share every behavior with every person on the planet, because we're given certain specific contacts. Every teacher of God, it says, is given certain specific contacts. So they're going to do different things than they do with the rest of the world, with whom they do nothing because they haven't met them.
But the fact that you would just share the truth with your brother, with every brother.
If you share it with everyone you come across, yes.
Or even one you think of.
Yeah, anyone you think of, that's right.
Remember that we said that a conflicted teacher is a poor teacher and a poor learner.
Remember to emphasize this.
And a poor learner, because you're learning what you're teaching is. His lessons are confused and their transfer value severely limited by his confusion.
I'll read it again. Strictly speaking, conflict cannot be projected precisely because it cannot be fully shared. Any attempt, it cannot be shared at all, really. Any attempt to keep part of conflict, and get rid of another part of conflict does not really mean anything. It is meaningless. Remember that we said that a conflicted teacher is a poor teacher and a poor learner. His lessons are confused, and their transfer value severely limited by his confusion. So if we apply this to the teacher of God, this isn't a very advanced teacher of God right here.
That's how I perceive one truth. I can perceive it all.
His lessons are confused. So he's teaching confusion.
Yeah.
And so he's limited. His learning is limited by his confusion.
Right.
And so is his students.
All right. A second fallacy is the idea that you can get rid of something you do not want by giving it away. Huh? Oh man.
We can think of anger.
I'm thinking about all the junk around here. I keep saying I'm trying to get rid of.
Apply it more to emotional or ego things like anger. We think we can get rid of something by giving it away, giving it to others. But look at what he says next.
I know. Giving it is how you keep it. The belief that by giving it out, you have excluded it from within is a complete distortion of the power of extension.
We can believe this, but we can't make it true. We can't make it real. We can feel better when we project our anger, but it's not really better. We don't really feel better. It's like a cigarette smoker. When they smoke a cigarette when they're having nick fit, it doesn't really make them feel better, but they believe it actually speeds up their heart, increases the stress of their whole body, mind organism, but their mind believes that it makes them feel better, and so it does. But it's a distortion. This is a distortion of the power of extension. A second fallacy is the idea that you can get rid of something you do not want by giving it away. Giving it is how you keep it. The belief that by giving it out, you have excluded it from within is a complete distortion of the power of extension or projection.
That is why those who project from the ego are vigilant for their own safety. They are afraid that their projections will return and hurt them. They do believe they have blotted them out of their own minds, but they also believe they are trying to creep back into them,
Into what?
their own minds,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
This is because their projections have not left their minds, and this in turn forces them to engage in compulsive activity in order not to recognize
This is a
this.
powerful
Is
passage here.
this what my compulsive activity
This
is
is where he
about?
says it's coming from. And they come out in our nightmares and in our evil dreams, these projections that we've suppressed, that we believe we've blotted them out. Let me read this again. This is a powerful paragraph.
It is very
That is
deep.
why those who project from the ego are vigilant for their own safety. They are afraid that their projections will return and hurt them. They do believe they have blotted them out of their own minds, but they also believe they are trying to creep back into them.
Uh,
This is because their projections have not left their minds, and this, in turn, forces them to engage in compulsive activity in order not to recognize
wow.
this.
So we've pushed it underground instead of allowing it to, just instead of looking at it and letting it go.
Right.
We've pushed it
And
back under,
compulsive
and then we're
activity, or what he calls
engaged in compulsive activity.
in another place he calls it perpetual motion, that we've dedicated ourselves as egos to
And that's where this
to
feeling
perpetual
of not
motion, but
doing
not to
enough
eternal
comes
thoughts.
from too, that you're not
Well,
doing
that's a
enough
compulsive
because
thought, so it's a compulsive activity, obsessing that you're not doing enough, so
uh-huh.
it can go both ways. Your turn.
Woo! You cannot perpetuate an illusion about another without perpetuating it about yourself. There's no way out of this because it is impossible to fragment the mind. To fragment is to break into pieces, and mind cannot attack. The belief that it can, a fallacy which the ego always makes, underlies its whole use of projection. The mind cannot attack. This is because it does not understand what the mind is, and therefore does not understand what you are. Yet its existence is dependent on your mind.
What's existence? The ego.
Egos, yes. Therefore does not understand what you are. Of course not. Yet its existence is dependent on your mind because it is a belief. The ego is a belief.
It's unreal belief.
There's this belief in death. There's no
It's a
death, but a
misbelief.
belief in
It's a
death.
misbelief,
And
properly
there's
speaking,
no
as Jesus
real
says.
anything that God did not create, but there is a
Yes.
belief in
There's a
these
belief
things. There's a
in
belief in an
separation.
opposition to
The
God,
separation is really a
and
belief
that's
in
the
separation,
problem there.
a
That
mass
belief.
belief. Yes.
So how do we let go of this belief?
By turning the belief
We
around.
let miracles
It's a
reveal
misbelief,
to
so we
us
need the Holy Spirit to give us
as
the
we're
true
willing
belief.
to let go of these misbeliefs. The
Yes.
miracles begin to reveal to us the
What's
truth,
really going
only
on.
the truth,
And only the kingdom is really going on.
and
Only
yeah,
the kingdom of
and
heaven.
there's not
Only
we to
our
use
real being. There
part
is
of
no
my
ego.
mind to keep myself miserable.
Exactly.
What for?
See, we have an inner Christ, an indwelling Christ that can at any moment say, "Peace be still," to the winds and the waves of ego,
Oh,
and it will be still
yes.
because it is a part of our minds and it is under the law of the whole mind. Ultimately,
yes. Wow.
we have divorced ourselves from this power because we've associated with this tiny part and tracked with this tiny part for so long that we think it is us.
And now our work is just to
turn it
this
around, to
tiny
keep
part,
turning
to
it
keep
around on the ego.
exposing it,
Keep exposing it and
exposing
turning it around.
Oh,
Exposing it
you
and turning
don't
it around.
like this? What is it that doesn't like this?
Mhm.
Something needs to be revealed here.
There you go.
Something that would oppose God.
Yeah, it
What's
can't
going on?
exist. There's only one power. We have to
Right.
keep coming
And
back
we
to that.
won't
There's only
believe it
one
doesn't
truth,
exist if
only
we
one
won't
power,
look at it.
and that
So
is
we're
God.
going to look at it.
That's right. So you keep reading.
Do not be
The ego
afraid
is
of
there.
the ego is therefore a confusion in identification, which never had a consistent model and never developed consistently. It is the distorted product of the misapplication of the
case of
laws of
mistaken
God
identification.
by distorted minds which are misusing their own power. There you go. That's a great explanation.
You
of the
cannot.
ego.
So it's like a little child having a temper tantrum in a way.
Confused identification about who
But
we
even
are.
that is not quite right because a child can learn, but he seems to suggest in the Course that the ego cannot, that it really is a thing that knows nothing whatsoever. But in other places, it seems to suggest that it is something that
It's
can learn
clever
and
in
grow.
devising ways to keep you
So it's a little
deceived.
it's a little confusion. If anyone wants to comment on
It's
that
not
or on
confusing.
anything else, I'd like to
if you're
share your
caught up in it. I
yeah.
mean, I can see
Can the
the
ego
ego
learn?
wants to
Here's
call it
a question
convincing.
for you, good course students. Can the ego learn or can it not learn? Okay, you cannot
Whew,
perpetuate an illusion about another brother, without perpetuating it about yourself.
that's right.
There is no way out of this because it is impossible to fragment the mind. Now, when he says the mind here, is he speaking of your mind? No, he's
So
speaking of
there's the
your mind
whole
and
mind,
everyone's
the whole
mind, the
mind
whole
that
mind.
we're just.
He said
I mean,
it's
the whole thing
impossible.
is us, and we seem to be a little part of it
You
as
can't
well.
split your mind
Right.
apart from your brother's and judge him
There's
and
a
then escape from
fragment.
your own judgment. That's
There's no
why this is the
separation.
real deep meaning behind what Jesus said in the Bible: judge not lest ye be judged. Who do you think you'll be judged by? Not God, but by your own self, because he says by the same standard you judge, you will be judged against. You will apply that to yourself. It's not a God thing. It's just he's talking about the law of projection, that we will turn it boomerangs. What we give out boomerangs back to us is the way it is.
Because there's no one here
Because
but
it's
one.
impossible to fragment the mind.
The world I see just represents what's in my mind.
Right. If you see the real world or the world of
And
attack that the
as I
ego
take
fosters,
responsibility for
the
everything
unreal
I
world, the world of
see,
illusions. To
there's hope
frag
to change the world.
That's right. It starts one mind at a time being changed. To fragment is to break into pieces. And mind cannot attack. Mind can't break, can't engage in breaking. It doesn't break through any barriers. The belief that it can engage in violent activity, a fallacy which, where does every
The ego
murder
always
where
makes.
does every murder start? In the mind of the
Yeah, I
murderer,
hate
dwelling
you,
on,
and
oh, I
now I'm
want to
gonna
see him
take some
dead, I can't
action.
stand. Yeah. So the belief that it can, the mind can have murderous thoughts, for instance, and then feel guilty about them deeply, and then want to project that out, eventually resulting in the murder of the person. The belief that it can, a fallacy that the mind can attack, a fallacy which the ego always makes, underlies its whole use of projection. And then it directs the body, of course, to do what the mind bids it to do, or the ego, rather, bids it to do, the misbelief in the mind. This is because it does not understand what the mind is. It thinks the mind is separated or fragmented.
Or not that powerful.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
therefore
they
not that
can't even
powerful.
take any
No
action.
peace
All
of
they can do
mind
is
by
think about
itself.
stuff.
No peace of mind is very powerful by itself. And that's how I see the ego has us
Yeah,
seeing
the
the mind in
ego's like
pieces
the mind is
without
nothing.
peace.
The body's what does everything.
Yeah,
If you don't actually murder them, then you can think anything you want to think.
right. And that applies for anything else. We're just using murder as an example here because it's a
But in the
particularly extreme one.
world, to murder has real consequences. To think about murder doesn't have any consequences here in the
Yeah,
ego's
exactly.
realm
You can't get in
of the
trouble for
world.
thinking about anything. Right. This is because it does not understand what the mind is, and therefore does not understand what you are. What are you? You are mind.
I am
You are
spirit.
soul.
I am love.
Yet its existence is dependent on your mind. The ego's existence is dependent on your mind, just as much as a wave is dependent on the ocean or a sunbeam is dependent on the sun, because it is a belief. Beliefs are of the mind. The ego is therefore a confusion and identification, a case of mistaken identification, which never had a consistent model.
Never developed consistently. So
Who's reading?
that's why it's all confused and pitiful.
That's right. The ego never had a consistent model and never developed consistently. You could say, well, what about a person with a good parents, that were model citizens and everything else? Well, that can show you how to be a good ego, but it can't show you how to be a soul.
It will not free
it can't.
you. It only keeps you in
It'll
bondage
yeah.
to the world's ideas.
You can be a good citizen and totally asleep.
Yeah.
You can be a convict and totally awake. That's the truth of it. It is the distorted product of the misapplication of the laws of God. The ego is the distorted product of the misapplication. Notice he says misapplication of the laws of God, namely projection into misprojection by distorted minds, which are misusing their own power. So a lot of mis there. So it results in what he calls miscreation, which is when we give anything other than love to our brothers.
Do not be afraid of the ego. Its existence does depend on your mind, and as you made it by believing in it, so you can dispel it by withdrawing belief from it. Do not project the responsibility for your belief in it onto anyone else, or you will preserve the belief. When you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence yourself, you will have laid aside all anger and all attack, because they come from the attempt to share or project the responsibility for your own errors. But having accepted the errors as
Where does
yours,
all anger and all attack come from?
your refusal to accept responsibility, right,
Yes,
for
for your own
yourself,
errors.
for your own errors. Do not keep
But
them,
having, but
but
having,
having accepted the errors as yours, do not keep them.
that's
There we
key.
go.
That's
Do
key.
not blame
Do
yourself.
not keep
Blaming
them.
yourself
Remember to
doesn't work
emphasize.
any better than blaming someone else.
So read that again
Okay.
with the emphasis proper.
All right.
But
But
having,
having spirit to
but
be
but having accepted.
okay, but having accepted the errors as yours, do not keep them. Accept them as yours, but do not keep them. Give them over quickly to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, so that all their effects will vanish from your minds and from the sonship as a whole. He will teach you to perceive beyond belief, because truth is beyond belief, and his perception is true.
So there is a real world, and people get caught up on the real world's just an illusion because in one place it seems to suggest it. But I think they're misinterpreting that one statement in the whole course. But the real world is real. It's
I
not
don't
just
know.
it's
I
not
don't
just a
understand it the way
metaphor.
you do.
It's not just a metaphor. The real world is actually truth.
The real world is real
It's
and
real.
true,
It's
yes,
true.
but we see a lot of other things that are
Yes.
not part of that world.
Right.
So when you say the real world, sometimes you seem to me to be talking about your actual experiences here
If
in
they're
a
coming from a
body.
right mind, if they're coming from a
Right,
healed mind, if
right.
they're coming from a place that projects only love,
But
teaches only love,
and even if they
then
have that intention, if they're not doing it, don't seem to be
then
doing it
they're on the
perfectly,
path. Then
right?
they're on the
And
path to the real world. They're on the bridge. They're
and
they're
they're
they're on their way.
still
They're pilgrims
right. They're
to the real world.
perfect. It's all
Yeah.
perfect, just as it
Yeah.
is.
Do not be afraid of the ego. So its existence does depend on your mind, and as you made it by believing in it, so you can dispel it by withdrawing belief from it. Do not project the responsibility for your belief in it onto anyone else, or you will preserve the belief. Whenever we
Yeah.
say you made me
So
feel this or you
first,
made me
it's
feel that, we're
first.
projecting the
Well, I'm
responsibility.
usually. So the first step is stop blaming my
Stop blaming your
brother and
brother for
others.
what you're feeling.
And then who's to blame then? Someone's to blame for this crap. It's got to be me.
Yep.
So then the next thing is I'm not to blame either.
Yeah, you're to look at it, realize that you've attempted to project blame on your brother because you have been unwilling to accept the fact that your
So
ego is
now I
constantly
accept
blaming you. You
responsibility
accept
for it.
responsibility
Right.
for the error of
But
blaming
look
yourself,
at it.
blaming your
Look at the
brother as a
ego, how
scapegoat.
what the ego's doing.
See what the ego does. It uses your brother as a scapegoat so that you don't have to deal with your own
Right.
shit.
When I join with Holy Spirit, though, I can look at this shit
Yes.
and see that it's really nothing.
Yes.
But if I don't join with Spirit and look at it, it keeps hiding. It
That's
remains hidden, and I remain confused and in conflict.
That's right.
So this is the way out of the conflict.
That's right. When you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence, not just its errors, but its existence yourself, you created it. It did not create you. You will have laid aside all anger and all attack because they come from the attempt to share the responsibility for your own errors. You're wanting to share with your brother. You helped me do this. You did this to me. But having accepted the errors as yours, this is key. Do not keep them. Give them over quickly to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, so that all their effects will vanish from your minds and
that
from the
means
sonship.
time,
And
eternally,
look
past
what he
and
says.
future. All the effects vanish.
Yes.
We think, well, we can do nothing about the past, but there is no past.
Yes.
The time is always now. So
that's right.
Acceptance of the truth right now just undoes.
It undoes everything in all dimensions.
All
yes,
the,
that's correct.
Misperceptions.
That's what he says
and
in the
all
course.
the unloving thoughts or whatever, they were never there.
That's right.
No effects of them can remain.
So when we give our ego errors over to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, then all their effects will vanish from our minds and from the sonship as a whole. Because wherever healing is accepted in any part, it's accepted by the whole. By the whole mind, because the mind is whole. The mind is not fragmented. It is a whole mind.
The mind is ours.
And that mind is ours. That's the mind of Christ that is whole.
We heal.
For the mind of God.
We let him teach us to heal.
Yes.
I think it's just such a beautiful thing.
And then this last part alludes to what he calls the real world. He will teach you to perceive beyond belief, because truth is beyond belief and his perception is true. So just as the ego misperceives, the Holy Spirit perceives properly, and he can give his sight or Christ's vision to us.
Yes.
Your turn.
The ego can be completely forgotten at any time. The ego can be completely forgotten at any time because it was always a belief that is totally incredible.
Or unbelievable, yeah.
No one can keep a belief he has judged to be unbelievable. The more you learn about the ego, the more you realize that it cannot be believed. The incredible cannot be understood because it is unbelievable. The utter meaninglessness of every or all perception which comes from the unbelievable must be apparent, but it is not beyond belief because it was made by belief.
The whole
My goodness.
purpose, let me read this again. The ego can be completely forgotten at any time, any instant. You can completely let go of
That's
the
the
ego.
holy instant when we do forget the
Yes,
ego and join with the
exactly,
Holy Spirit
exactly,
in the
exactly.
right
Or
mind
our right mind.
and
Yeah,
love
exactly.
Lord.
Because the
Yes,
ego was always a belief, a misbelief, truly, that is totally incredible. No, no one, miss means away. So it's away from a belief. It's not a belief, it's away from it. It's in the opposite direction. No one can keep a belief he has judged to be unbelievable. The more you learn about the ego, that's Jesus' point of the Course to teach us about this ego, the more you realize that it cannot be believed. The incredible cannot be understood because it is unbelievable. He's not wanting us to understand the ego. It is ununderstandable. He's wanting us to transcend it with the Holy Spirit. The utter meaninglessness of every perception which comes from the unbelievable must be apparent, but it is not beyond belief because it was made by belief. We made the ego by believing in it.
Wow. All right. The whole purpose of this course is to teach you that the ego is unbelievable and will forever be unbelievable. That's the purpose of our course, of our teaching
This course
here.
and every course,
To teach
that is
me,
a
I'm teaching
way home.
me that the ego is unbelievable, forever will be. You who made the ego by believing the unbelievable cannot make this judgment alone. But you made the wrong judgment by believing you were alone.
That's why we can't make it alone. See, this is from the
You made the
shorthand
wrong
notes.
judgment by believing you were alone.
So when we believed we were alone, that was where the ego was invented. We invented like a person on like in that movie with Tom Hanks. He
It's a
invents the
separate little
imaginary.
me. I'm my own
Remember
God
Tom Hanks
now.
on? Remember that
I'm
movie?
separated from
Do you ever see
God, and
Castaway?
yes, I've seen it. It's
Yeah, and
pretty cool. I
he
remember.
makes
Yeah,
up his own friend
I would like
in the
to see
beach
that
ball.
movie
But
again.
that's how we did the ego because we believe we're alone. We created this figment, this
Also,
imaginary friend, which kind of turned against us at
maybe
some
we should
point.
get Netflix back. You think? I don't
We're teaching right now
know.
by accepting.
By accepting the atonement for yourself, you are deciding against the belief that you can be alone, thus dispelling the idea of separation and affirming your true identification with the whole kingdom as literally part of you. This identification is as beyond doubt as it is beyond belief. Your wholeness has no limits because its being is in infinity.
He's wanting to show us and teach us that we're much more than this one little ego, body, mind, limited by space and time. That we are one with the whole
That's the
sonship.
that's
We're
the
one with
entire
every son of God.
demonstration of Jesus on the cross, right?
And
Just to demonstrate,
his whole
yeah,
life was about that,
or
teaching that
all the
we're
way
all
to
joined.
this thing called death.
Yeah,
That is
exactly.
does not touch
It
you
wasn't a
either.
separate teaching at death. It was the same teaching,
Right.
only love, that he taught all along.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of this course is to teach you that the ego is unbelievable and will forever be unbelievable.
So Jesus didn't have an ego that was trying to fight with these people to
His
protect
ego was
his
humble.
body.
His ego was
Say,
humble. He had the
how
ego.
dare you do this to me?
He had the ego.
He knew
He
this
had the.
wasn't him. He was
He
only
had.
a communication device. They're destroying their phone because they don't want to hear what it has to say. That
Yes.
doesn't make sense,
Yes.
right?
They were misprojecting onto him. But Jesus had a humble ego enough to say, Father, I don't want to die, but if it be your will, nevertheless, I lay my desires down and accept your will for me as what is best for me.
So
And that's a humble ego.
It's like I want to break that mirror because I don't like what it's reflecting back at me.
Yeah, that's not going to work too well.
Yeah, because
There's another mirror that's going to take its place somewhere else. So let's read it. You who made the ego by believing the unbelievable cannot make this judgment alone. What judgment? That it is unbelievable and will forever be unbelievable. You cannot make this judgment alone because your judgment has been so warped by the ego's judgment that you can't judge properly
because you
anymore.
believed you were alone, or you could never have
Yes.
began to judge.
And here he gives some clarification,
place.
but you made the wrong judgment in the
Why
first
did we
place
think we were alone?
by believing you
How
were
did
alone.
we separated ourselves from
We
God,
thought we
from
did.
the
We
whole
thought we did.
love.
We didn't
We're
really.
going to be this separate little piece of love.
We
can
thought
go it on
we
our
thought
own,
that we
just
thought
as powerful as God. Look at the illusion we have. We've made a whole world That's the power of our mind.
We
And
thought
yet it's not a happy
we
world.
thought we could make a world apart from God, but since God is literally all in all, that was an impossibility from the very beginning. So God followed
So
us
God
here,
is
you
even
could
with
say.
us here
God is, there is
in
no
our
place, time, or
sorrow
state that God is
and in our
absent from.
joy.
That's
It's
what he
here.
says. So there is no world apart from God, and therefore
He's
the
in
world
everything.
cannot be an
So
attack
he's
on
with the
God.
serial killer when he's doing all those horrible
He
things.
doesn't
He was
condone
with
or cause
Hitler,
those actions, but he's
but
there
he's
with
with
them.
them. He's the power
There's no
behind
way
it.
anyone can divorce themselves from that which is
It's just
literally all in all, or that which
misperception.
is the universe.
So look, all that we think of Hitler and what happened is a thing in the past, but as we accept atonement for ourselves right now, and all the effects of any seeming misperception, it's like just this is why I have trouble now following
When we
you
heal,
when
we're
you're
not healed
trying to
alone.
beat up us or scapegoat certain. I don't know.
Well, just
I
like you like
just
the TV shows with the murder and everything, I like, just saying, if you want to point that out. I like politics, but to me, they're good examples of ego, just as I'm sure your shows are for you.
But you forget. You forget. I don't forget that I'm
Why do you think I
I'm,
forget? How do you know I forget
because you
what I
get
remember?
caught up in
I don't
it.
get
You
caught
get
up any more
very.
than you get caught up.
I don't get caught up in those shows at
Yes, you
all.
do.
No,
You
I
watch them for
don't.
days on end sometimes. Don't lie. I was getting caught up. Anyways, we're not here to attack each other. We're here
No,
to teach.
anyway, you're just misperceiving. That's all. You don't.
I'm not misperceiving. I know politics is a game. It's a joke.
No, I'm talking
But it's
about
entertaining.
me. You're misperceiving what I'm doing, and then you're
Maybe
trying
you're
to tell
misperceiving
your
what I'm
story.
doing.
No, I'm
How do
not.
you know? You see in my heart, mind, and heart. Are you God suddenly?
No,
You can.
yes,
You
of
know
course.
everybody's deepest
I know
intentions and
you. I know
motivations.
you.
Okay, I got you. But you may back to teaching. Remember, this is the
Hey,
point of this.
I think we
Not
are
to
teaching. I'm
gang up.
teaching myself.
Okay, okay.
Right
But look,
now.
we're having
If
fun
anyone
too.
else benefits,
And we're showing how
hallelujah.
you can
Praise the Lord.
argue.
I
We're
love
showing
you.
how you can argue in love. But you made the wrong judgment by believing you were alone. By accepting the atonement for yourself, this is the first time he mentions this, which he says later is our only responsibility. This is the first time he mentions it here in the course. By accepting the atonement for yourself, you are deciding against the belief that you can be alone. So notice, it's not just for yourself. That atonement cannot be understood, as he said before, except as a pure act of sharing. So it's actually not just for yourself, it's for the whole sonship. Because as these errors are dispelled in your mind, he said they are dispelled in the mind of all the kingdom as well, of all the sonship. So by accepting the atonement for yourself, notice yourself is a universal thing. You are deciding against the belief that you can be alone, that's why, and thus dispelling the idea of separation and affirming your true identification with the whole kingdom or sonship as literally part of
So
you.
right now, I feel a desire for more brothers to be joined with us here, reading this and doing this. Is
And
that
that's why
like
we're
the
recording
ego
this.
being?
That's why we're recording this, because
So
this,
you're
with our
welcome to
age,
come here. This is the miracle place, and there's no defined roles. Nobody, I don't know. I know that it's affordable to live here. God's paying for things, and so if
that's
you're interested in this,
this
this is a place to come and just follow the Spirit's lead. That's all you do.
that's the little plug for the Miracle House. This identification with the whole sonship or the whole kingdom is as beyond doubt as it is
We're not
beyond
selling
belief.
anything though.
No, as it is
We're
beyond
giving away
belief.
truth. That's
Protect all things you value by the act of giving it away. Your wholeness has no limits because its being is in infinity. Let's go ahead and read this supplemental material from the manual of
You don't
teachers.
think it's getting long?
No, it's fine.
We can make
Peace.
another one.
It's fine.
Short
We'll just
one,
go ahead
short.
and do a day so we can show people what is involved in a day.
All right.
Peace. Your turn to read.
Peace is impossible.
This is from the Manual for Teachers. How is peace possible in the world?
Peace is impossible to those who look on war. Peace is inevitable to those who offer peace.
This is exactly what we were just reading about.
How easily, then, is your judgment of the world escaped?
Your judgment of the world, not the world, but your judgment of the world. Notice.
It is not the world which makes peace seem impossible.
Very important point.
It is the world you see that is
impossible. The world you see, the world as the ego sees it. See, he's giving
God's
clues.
Judgment on this distorted world redeemed it and made it fit to welcome peace.
God's judgment redeems the world.
And peace descends on it in joyous answer. Peace
He's speaking of this world we know.
Here. Peace now belongs here.
Here and now, in this world.
Because the thought of God has entered. What else but a thought of God
which is what we are.
Hell to heaven merely by being what it is. The earth bows down before its gracious presence and it leans down in answer to raise it up
That's the
again.
earth it's speaking of.
Wow. Now is the question different. It is no longer, can peace be possible in this world? But instead, the question is now, is it not impossible that peace be absent here?
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful
Yes.
statement. That's a beautiful,
That's a change of mind
beautiful,
there.
yeah. Because
Your
this is what
questions
he's
are
talking about. The
different.
earth bows down, and before its great, before heaven's gracious presence. This is talking about what he says in the text, where he says, "Heaven and earth shall pass away," means they shall not always continue to exist as separate states. In fact, the truth of the matter is that they never did exist as separate states. But
Only in our awareness and
since
our
we
split
seemed
off
to had a
mind.
split
Yes.
mind and a separated state within ourselves, we perceived it that way.
Yes.
So let's
Wow. So we're just
let me
learning
reread this because
to
it's such
give
an
up
important.
this perception.
Look at how beautiful this ties in with our text. I love it when my version does this. Peace is impossible to those who look on war or conflict. Peace
Right.
is inevitable to those who offer peace. That's the
Yes.
law of
No more
projection as the
conflict.
Holy Spirit uses it. How easily then is your judgment of the world escaped? It is not the world which makes peace seem impossible. It is the world you see, or I would say the
That is
world as you see
impossible.
it, that is impossible. Yet has God's judgment on this distorted world that your ego
I'm going to
imagines it
post
sees
this on my
redeemed
timeline, this
it and
paragraph.
made it fit to welcome peace. And peace descends on it in joyous answer. Like a
Wow.
dove, peace now belongs here because a thought of God has entered.
And
What
where can
else?
any problem be? There's no
Right.
problems.
What else but
Mm,
a thought of God turns
mm,
hell to heaven merely by being what it is?
mm.
The earth bows down
Wow.
before its heaven's gracious presence, and it, heaven, leans down in answer to raise it up again. Now is the question different. It is no longer, can peace be possible in this world?
But
But instead,
instead,
is it not impossible that peace be absent here?
it is impossible
Why? Because
that peace is
God
absent
is not
here.
absent here. Therefore, peace
I
cannot be
am here.
absent
I
here
am a
either.
miracle.
Because
I am
wherever
the
God
peace
is,
of
there His
God.
peace is
I am
also.
love, and I'm not absent.
Okay,
When the
let's.
ego comes and takes over, takes hostage,
That's right.
takes me hostage, then I'm absent and there's a fearful
That
world.
that's right. Let's do paragraph by paragraph here with this lesson. 104. I seek but what belongs to me in truth.
So we're
Let's
gonna
just go paragraph by paragraph. You
all right,
start.
all right. Today's idea continues with the thought that joy and peace are not but idle dreams. They are your right because of what you are. They come to you from God, who cannot fail to give you what he wills. Yet must there be a place made ready to receive his gifts. They are not welcomed gladly by a mind which has instead received the gifts it made, where his belong, as substitutes for them.
Today
So
we.
my mind is my altar where
Yes.
true worship takes place. I am the
Yes.
church, and I've got my altar all defiled with all the world's
Yes.
ideas, the
Like bat
ego's
droppings all in
beliefs
the
are
in
all
the.
over it.
We
So
gotta
we're gonna
clean it
get
and
that
sweep it
off,
and scrub it
and
and
then we have
everything.
a
And then
pure
we'll have a pure
altar.
altar. Yes.
Yeah,
Today we would remove all meaningless and self-made gifts which we have placed upon the holy altar where God's gifts belong.
yes,
These are the gifts which are our own in truth. His are the gifts which we inherited before time was, and which will still be ours when time has passed into eternity. And I will add,
yes.
is ours right now
That is
in the
just the
present.
joy of
That's
life,
it's where
joy
they're
and
always at in the
being.
present.
Yeah.
These are the gifts which are within us now, for they are timeless. Now is actually a part of timelessness, and we
Wow.
need not wait to have them. They belong to us today.
Yes.
Therefore, we will to have them now,
Yeah.
and know in choosing them in place of what we made, we but unite our will with what God wills, and recognize the same as being one.
Woo! Wow, that's so
Your turn. How long
exciting.
to practice?
How much should I read?
Just read that tiny
Our
bit.
longer practice periods today, the hourly 5 minutes given truth for your salvation, should begin with this: I seek but what belongs to me in truth, and joy and peace are my inheritance.
Then lay aside the conflicts of the world that offer other gifts and other goals made of illusions, witnessed to by them, and sought for only in a world of dreams. All this we lay aside, and seek instead that which is truly ours, as we ask to recognize what God has given us. He's given us everything, right? He's given us the real
Yes.
world.
We clear a holy place within our minds before his altar, where his gifts of peace and joy are welcome, and to which we come to find what has been given us by him. We come in confidence today, aware that what belongs to us in truth is what he gives, and we would wish for nothing else, For nothing else belongs to us in truth. And that is just a plenty, isn't it?
So
Joy
do
and peace.
so do we clear the way for him today by simply recognizing that his will is done already, and
Mm-hmm.
that joy and peace belong to us as his eternal gifts, that he never rescinds, he never takes them back.
Yeah.
We will not let ourselves lose sight of them between the times we come to seek for them where he has laid them, in our inner altar of our hearts and minds. This reminder will we bring to mind as often as we can. I seek, let's say this together. I
I
seek
seek
but
but
what
what
belongs
belongs
to
to
me
me
in
in
truth.
truth.
God's
God's
gifts
gifts
of
of
joy
joy
and
and
peace
peace
are
are
all
all
I
I
want.
want.
Very good. So I hope you can see
That's
that my
excellent,
version
honey.
is really ideal for like a daily devotional period where you a quiet time with God or with a partner studying it together. It's not very
Or
long. We
community,
spent a
come and
long
join
time,
us.
because we were reading and talking about it, but this
You
is
can
a
just come for
wonderful
a
way.
brief stay.
So I encourage you
It's a very
to check
humble
out this
place. Don't
document.
expect anything fancy. But there's no
Thanks.
cost
Thanks for
involved.
watching, everybody.
Dollar
Oh,
amounts.
we'll give you one more snake. I know you want to see that snake. There you go.
All right.
All right. See you guys.